January 1959. In a Soviet Union at the height of the Cold War, a group of 10 young individuals, mostly students and graduates of the Ural Polytechnic Institute, prepare their backpacks for a legendary expedition. Their goal was to trek 350 kilometers on skis through the northern Ural Mountains and conquer Mount Otorten. They were Grade 2 hikers, vigorous, experienced, and extremely close-knit. Nothing in their smiles captured on film betrayed the fact that, just a few days later, they would become the protagonists of the most terrifying mystery of the 20th century. Shortly after the march began, one of the group members, Yuri Yudin, began suffering from severe back and joint pain. On January 28th, in a small mining settlement called Second Northern, Yuri said goodbye to his friends. He embraced his companions, gave his fur hat to one of them, and turned back. Yuri Yudin had no way of knowing that this chronic illness, which appeared so suddenly, had just saved his life. He would be the sole survivor of the expedition, destined to live the rest of his days with one haunting question. What happened in those mountains? Left with 9 members, 7 men and 2 women, led by the ambitious Igor Dyatlov, the youth forged deep into the heart of the Siberian wilderness. Their travel diaries, found later, describe an excellent atmosphere. They wrote poems, joked, and shared mandarins. However, as they drew closer to the mountain, the weather began to turn. Temperatures plummeted abruptly below -30 degrees Celsius, and the Ural wind began to howl through the pine trees. On February 1st, around 3 p.m., the group began ascending the slope of Mount Kolat-Syakhl. Due to the fierce blizzard and near-zero visibility, the hikers deviated from their route. Instead of descending toward a forest where they would have been sheltered from the wind, Igor Dyatlov made a bizarre decision. He resolved to set up camp right there, on the barren and frozen slope of the mountain. The local Mansi tribesmen called this place the Mountain of the Dead. This was the last photograph found in their cameras. That evening, after eating, they lay down in their sleeping bags. It was their last night on Earth. When February 12th, the day the group was supposed to send a telegram back home, passed without a word, panic set in. On February 20th, a search party consisting of volunteers, the military, and aircraft began their hunt. 6 days later, on February 26th, the tent was found. What the investigators discovered left them speechless. The tent was half buried in the snow and completely empty, but the canvas walls had been violently slashed with a knife from the inside out. Something extremely terrifying had driven the youths to cut open their own tent to escape as quickly as possible, refusing to use the normal exit. Inside the tent lay all their belongings: thick jackets, boots, axes, food, and money. Outside in the frozen snow, footprints could be seen descending the slope toward the forest. The tracks told an unbelievable story. 8 or 9 people had fled in their socks, some wearing a single shoe, and others completely barefoot. At a temperature of -30 degrees in the middle of a Siberian night, running without footwear is a certain death sentence in less than an hour. What could have frightened them so badly that the deadly frost became a better option than staying inside the tent? The footprints faded away after about 500 meters, but the rescuers continued down toward the edge of the forest. After a kilometer and a half of trekking through the darkness and deep snow, at the edge of the woods, beneath a giant cedar tree, the first clues of the tragedy were uncovered. The remains of a small, long-extinguished fire, and the first 2 lifeless bodies, Yuri Krivonyshenko and Yuri Doroshenko. The 2 young men were dressed only in underwear and thin shirts. They wore no shoes. Their palms and fingers were burned, a sign that they had desperately tried to keep the fire alive, but could no longer feel their hands due to extreme frostbite. Furthermore, the lower branches of the cedar tree were broken up to a height of 5 meters. Investigators found traces of human skin and flesh embedded in the bark of the tree. The youths had tried to climb with utter desperation. Were they climbing to see if their camp was still safe, or were they fleeing from something pursuing them from the ground? Shortly after, between the forest and the tent, rescuers found 3 more bodies spaced out in the snow. Among them was the leader of the group, Igor Dyatlov. His body was frozen, facing upward, with one hand clutching a birch branch and the other protecting his head. The position of all 3 bodies suggested that, at some point after the fire under the cedar went out, they realized their only chance of survival was to return to the tent to retrieve their clothes. But the distance was too great, and the mountain defeated them one by one. Zina Kolmogorova, one of the women, was found closest to the tent. She had died while crawling through the snow, leaving a trail of blood behind her. The autopsy of the first 5 students found brought a clear and predictable diagnosis. They had all died of extreme hypothermia. Although they had scratches on their faces and hands, they sustained no fatal internal injuries. The search for the remaining 4 members continued for weeks, as the heavy snow of the Urals guarded its secrets. It wasn't until early May, when spring began to melt the thick layers of ice, that the mystery took a downright horrific turn. Just 75 meters away from the cedar tree, in a deep ravine dug out by a stream under 4 meters of packed snow, the last 4 bodies were found. These youths were much better dressed than the first 5. They had cut the clothes off the bodies of their dead companions under the cedar tree to wrap their own feet. But the way they died completely shattered the theory of simple freezing. When forensic doctors began the autopsies of the 4 in the ravine, they were horrified. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol had his skull crushed by an immense force. Semyon Zolotaryov and young Lyudmila Dubinina had their chest cavities completely fractured, with ribs broken and driven into their organs. One of the doctors stated that such massive trauma could only be compared to the impact of a high-speed car crash or the shock wave of an explosion. Yet on the outside, their bodies had no bruises or open wounds. They were crushed on the inside, but intact on the outside. The macabre details continued. Lyudmila Dubinina was missing her tongue, her eyes, and fragments of her facial tissue. While some biologists attributed this to scavenging animals, the position of her body, face down in a running stream, left room for much suspicion. Furthermore, when the clothes of the victims in the ravine were tested in a laboratory, experts discovered something inexplicable. The textiles exhibited an extremely high level of radiation. Where did that radiation come from in the middle of a deserted mountain? The Soviet authorities acted with suspicious speed and secrecy. The file was abruptly closed in May 1959. The official conclusion formulated by investigator Lev Ivanov was as bizarre as it was poetic. The youths died because of an elemental force of nature, which the students were unable to overcome. The documents were immediately sent to secret archives, and the Dyatlov Pass area was completely closed to the public for more than 3 years. The investigator of the case, Lev Ivanov, would admit decades later, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, that he was pressured by high-ranking officials to close the investigation. He himself believed in a troubling theory. In February and March of 1959, multiple witnesses, including military personnel and another group of hikers 50 kilometers away, reported seeing flying orange spheres in the sky. Had the students been involuntary witnesses to a secret military experiment? This is the last photograph from the film of the camera found around the neck of Yuri Krivonashenko. Frame number 34. It is a blurry, shaken image that captures a powerful glowing spot against a completely black background. Some believe it is just an accidental exposure while the film was being removed, but mystery enthusiasts argue it is evidence of the exact moment when something bright and unknown appeared above their tent, causing the general panic. Today, theories are divided. Skeptics support the slab avalanche theory. The snow would have collapsed onto the tent, causing the chest fractures, and the youths fled out of fear of being buried alive. However, this theory fails to explain why they ran a kilometer away barefoot instead of digging for their clothes, nor does it account for the presence of radiation. The theory of secret military testing with missiles or infrasound weapons remains the most plausible for many. The shockwave of a missile could have created the pressure that crushed their bones without leaving external marks. Local legends have not been forgotten either. The Mansi population firmly believes that the youths were punished by the spirits of the mountain or attacked by the Menk, a legendary, highly violent hominid creature resembling a yeti. Those who believe in this variant say that only a monster with supernatural physical strength could have ripped out Lyudmila's tongue or crushed Zolotaryov's chest in a single motion. Yet rescuers found no other footprints besides those of the students. In the year 2020, the Russian prosecutor's office officially reopened the file and, after modern computer simulations, placed the verdict once again on an avalanche and poor visibility. However, for the families of the victims and the millions of people who know this case, the mystery remains intact. At the cemetery in Yekaterinburg, the graves of the 9 youths stand as a testament to a night of nightmares. Their tombstones read simply, "They died sacrificed on the altar of science and sports." Today, that place in the Ural Mountains officially bears the name Dyatlov Pass, in honor of the young leader who guided his friends toward a tragic fate. The wind continues to blow with the same fury over the frozen slopes of the mountain, sweeping away the tracks of history. The truth about what really happened there, on the night of February 2nd, 1959, will most likely remain hidden forever in the eternal snows of Siberia.